Welcome, viewers! This video is a little different than what I normally do since YouTube has been really hammering all my normal stuff lately. So, let's do something that is a bit of a dead trend, so I can't say I'm copying anybody. A presidential tier list! Yay! Another one! And as with all list videos, it will somehow be both arbitrary and objective. Okay, but for real, here's what's gonna happen. So, normally there's some kind of restrictions as to these tier lists, and yes, there will be. There are certain presidents that are not going to be under consideration. Now, most people will just exclude, like, the sitting president, but I'm a bit more restricted than that. So, we're not going to rate any president who has served in my lifetime. So, which means every president from George H.W. Bush onward is off limits. So, that means we have every president from George Washington to Ronald Reagan to put on this tier list. So let's go ahead and clean up that list here. George H.W. Bush, you go meow, then Bill Clinton, then George W., then Barack, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Okay, now that all of the most likely to cause controversy candidates are put up here, let's go through the list. And we're gonna, of course, start in chronological order with George Washington. What was that old song? Washington came first and he was perfect? Yeah, Washington, you kind of have to give him S tier. If you don't, you're kind of breaking the rule of American grading. Yeah, obviously foreign policy, you know, like, I think a lot of people actually misjudge Washington's foreign policy because they have this idea of this like ultra isolationist. It's like, well, actually, Washington was not ideologically isolationist. In fact, his suggestion was, oh, the United States should probably stay out of European affairs for at least 20 years. But of course, this idea was built upon by further presidents like Jefferson and whatnot. This idea set the two-term precedent, which was very important, or at least the two-term precedent was based on his example, though, as I stated in my own video about FDR, the two-term precedent was actually set by Jefferson because John Adams didn't have the opportunity to do it. It doesn't become a precedent until someone repeats it, and so Jefferson was the real establisher of the two-term precedent. But now let's go on to John Adams. It's a mix, guys. Like if you've read the George McCullough book or have seen the HBO series, then you kind of have sympathy for John Adams. It's like I identify with him in much like of a personality sense. Like, he's very business oriented. It's like, okay, let's go here, get stuff done. All these Parisians just want to cavort and not get things done while my people are at home dying. So I identify with that on a very personal level. But as president, he was less than ideal. Setting up the Navy was great and everything. But, Alien and Sedition Acts, yeah. So I think I'm going to have to place John Adams at C tier. He's not the worst, but less than ideal with some of his domestic policy. Jefferson. On the one hand, of course, Jefferson as a person is also someone I would personally admire. It's like writer of the Declaration of Independence, very big idea. It's like he wrote the big philosophical document of American political philosophy. So it's hard to underestimate how valuable he is to American identity. There's also, of course, what he did as president, especially, the Louisiana Purchase. That was a very big deal, double the size of the country. The slavery issue is a complication for everybody, but if you have to grade on a curve based on their own time period, then I think Jefferson deserves to be an A tier president. Madison, father of the Constitution, Secretary of State under Jefferson, but in terms of his actual presidency, not a whole lot. It's like a lot of little things were done under him that were definitely have a big impact later, but in terms of his policies, he definitely had a short-term impact, but of course leading America through the War of 1812 was great and everything, but the War of 1812 was a tie at best, and can't remember where I heard it from, but a tie is basically like kissing your sister. Give him a B tier. Madison is B tier. James Madison is an S tier founding father, but he's a B tier president. James Monroe, B tier. Foreign policy was the big thing for him. There wasn't a whole ton domestic wise that it's notable. It's mostly foreign policy, and it was a good foreign policy, a valuable foreign policy, but mostly I'd say a B tier. John Quincy Adams, also C tier with his dad. Not terrible, but he just didn't have enough political capital to get anything done. Next, we have Andrew Jackson. But first, a word from our sponsor, HelloFresh. This year, I've been on a health journey. Here's a screenshot of me from the last video I recorded before I made this change, and here's a screenshot of me from the previous video. This is a 60-pound difference made from a single lifestyle decision, a change in diet. If you do nothing else to improve your health, a better diet will make all the difference in the world. And HelloFresh is a service that could help be your first step. HelloFresh helps take the hassle and confusion out of cooking, giving you exactly what you need. It is a food delivery service that will ship a full meal to your home with pre-measured ingredients to avoid waste, all ready to cook on the day of delivery or save for a future date. I've been teaching myself how to cook for the last 2 years, and HelloFresh meals come with a recipe and step-by-step instructions on how to prepare the food they sent you. HelloFresh recipes feature produce sourced directly from US farmers, going straight from the farm to your front door in under a week. They offer veggie, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome meals to satisfy whatever your diet or cravings are. They recently sent me the griddled onion cheeseburgers with special sauce and potato wedges, which were delicious. The needs of life change radically, so sometimes you need more than expected and sometimes less. Because of this, HelloFresh allows you to alter how many meals per week you're getting and how many servings. And HelloFresh has an amazing offer for viewers of this channel. By clicking the top link in the description in the pinned comment below, or by typing this URL into the address bar, you can get 65% off your first order, along with free shipping on your first box. The food is delicious, and you can trust me on this. A good diet is the first and most effective step towards improving your health. So go ahead and check out HelloFresh today by clicking that link. It's good for you, easy on the wallet, and it helps support the channel, allowing me to continue making history videos for years to come. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video, but for now, let's get back to that tier list. Oh boy, he is a wild card. On the one hand, refusing to follow the orders of the Supreme Court and ultimately setting into motion the Trail of Tears, violating the property rights of Native Americans, that puts him pretty low down the totem pole for me. Of course, my inner libertarian, anti-Federal Reserve, crypto gold buggery sense in the back of my head wants me to rank him higher because of his war against the Bank of the United States, and also for the fact that he's the first and only president who pay off the national debt. So it's very hard. It's like, I'm really tempted to give him F, but at the moment, I think I'll put him in D tier. I reserve the right to relocate him to F tier later. Van Buren, it's also going to put him down in D tier. Not as bad as Jackson in terms of setting up precedents, the Indian removal into motion, and then Van Buren is the one that really carried it out. Removing the Cherokee from Georgia, that was unconstitutional, that was illegal. And then Van Buren just followed through with it. So yeah, no, I'm putting him down in D tier with Jackson. William Henry Harrison, I'm tempted to put him in S tier mostly because like a president who leaves office in 30 days, beat that, Liz Truss, you 45-day hack. He's mostly inoffensive. I'm going to put him down in C tier. John Tyler, also D tier. He set a precedent which at the time I think many thought was unconstitutional. I had a video about that actually. No one at the time thought that the vice president became president and then would serve out a president's full term. He kind of just made it happen. So he kind of just rewrote the Constitution there. But also, John Tyler was a traitor. Yeah, no, really. It's like John Tyler lived to see the American Civil War, and when the Southern states seceded, he sided with his home state and actually served in the Confederate Congress, which makes him a traitor. In fact, you know what? I'm going to place him down in F tier. James K. Polk. James K. Polk is similar to Jefferson in that it's hard to beat, like adding tons of territory to the United States when it comes to like being important. So I think I'm going to place him up in A tier. I think the thing I like most about Polk is that he had a short list of accomplishments that he wanted to do as president, and he got them done, And you really got to appreciate that in a politician, because you definitely don't see that nowadays. He has to create a short, concise list. This is what we're doing, and he did it. I gotta appreciate that. Zachary Taylor, not great. Wasn't in there long enough to do anything, so I'm gonna put him in C tier. Miller Fillmore, same thing, C tier. All right, next let's go to Franklin Pierce. Not much great happened. D tier. James Buchanan, F tier because he allowed the Civil War to happen. Abraham Lincoln. The issue with Lincoln, of course, is that there's the idea of Lincoln, and then there is the reality of Lincoln, and the idea of Lincoln is much better than his reality. So I think I'm going to place Lincoln in B tier. Next, we have Andrew Johnson, whom I am putting in D tier. Not great, he basically just wanted to restore the antebellum United States minus slavery, which granted was huge. It's a huge change, but, more or less wanted to maintain the legal status quo in the South, which is, not great, Bob. Not great, violating, the individual rights of African Americans. Not great. So yeah, D tier at best. Ulysses S. Grant. He's one of these presidents that has gotten, their reputation has improved over time, especially in the last 10 years, as I've mentioned in a previous video about how over the last decade, in the 2010s, we saw race become a much bigger point in American political discourse. And so because of that, and the fact that, he waged a literal war on the KKK, his reputation has definitely improved. But unfortunately, Grant was way too trusting of people in his administration, which led to a lot of corruption. And so I think the best I can give him is B tier. It's like great on the ideals front, but on execution, not as great. It's like he's not an A tier president. Benjamin Harrison, he's the hero of Chile. It's like, I want to learn more about Benjamin Harrison. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about him. I just know that he was this compromise candidate who was allowed to enter the office because of a political compromise. So I am going to make him C tier. He's not terrible at all, and I want to do more about him. Like, especially the story about him in Chile is pretty interesting. So I want to do a video about that at some point. But yeah, I'll place him at C tier for now. If we were ranking presidents by the magnificence of their facial hair, he would be S tier, because he clearly has the best beard of any president we've ever had. And if presidential elections were determined by facial hair, then he would have won the election of 1876 hands down, because Samuel Tilden was a clean-shaven babyface. Then we have James Garfield, C tier. It's like the idea of Garfield is great, and you can look up Garfield quotes, and if you were like into the Tea Party stuff in the early Obama years, you would definitely like a lot of his quotes. But once again, not in office long enough to really make a huge mark, so I'm gonna put him in C tier. And next we have Arthur. Arthur is another one of these presidents who, there was low expectations of him, but he actually ended up doing very well. He fixed, a lot of the problem with the spoils system of the 19th century. So I think he actually deserves B tier, He was very unsurprising. There are some people who thought even that Trump could have potentially been like a, Arthur type president where he could fix a thing because he was very familiar with the corruption. Because Arthur was familiar with a lot of the corruption in the spoils system and handling of collecting taxes and tariff duties at ports. So he was able to use his knowledge of graft and corruption at the lower levels of government to create reforms at the federal level. Only serving one term and that being the only thing he was really able to do, I think B tier is about where he belongs. But next we have Grover Cleveland. Cleveland has had this reputation of being an honest man, but there were some things he actually did lie about. He lied about his health. He went on a yacht to have surgery in order to get a tumor removed, and to make sure that nobody found out about it, they removed it by making an incision inside his mouth so they could pull the tumor out through the mouth so that there's no scar on the outside anywhere on the face or head so that people wouldn't know he had it. And so a man who goes that far to do it. But I would also say he's probably the last Democratic president that I actually liked. It's he was the last bourbon Democrat, and I appreciate that. So there are a lot of other things I appreciate about Cleveland. So I think I'm going to give him an A tier. He is definitely, I think, A tier. He could be B tier. I think his second term is definitely B tier, but if we're judging him by his first term, it's A tier. Next, Benjamin Harrison. Sherman Antitrust Act was bullshit, so I am placing him in C tier. Next, we have William McKinley, another C tier president, another C tier. Nothing too exciting, it was Spanish-American War, that's great and everything, but it was also kind of a big mess and didn't wait long enough to find out anything about the Maine, and so he allowed himself to get whisked away by public opinion, I think. Next, we have Teddy Roosevelt and D tier. I'm not a big fan of Teddy, no. People want to blame America's current interventionist foreign policy on Woodrow Wilson, but in reality, Wilson's foreign policy was more or less built on Teddy Roosevelt. You know, it's like Teddy Roosevelt's penchant for little quick snap invasions. Now, granted, yes, they tended to be quicker and not tend to have as long of like a occupation period as Wilson's did. But Wilson was only able to pursue his foreign policy the way he did because Teddy Roosevelt set the precedent for, you know, intervention. So Teddy gets D tier. Grover Cleveland, C tier, you know. Founding the Federal Reserve was a very important and impactful thing. In fact, at some point, I think I might want to do a top 10 list of like the 10 most impactful presidents, not necessarily 10 best or favorite, but, you know, most impactful. Grover Cleveland, C tier. Woodrow Wilson, well, this isn't a surprise for any of you guys who've seen the history community. F tier. He is an F tier president, bad on domestic policy, bad on foreign policy. Everyone has a reason to hate him. He is an equal opportunity punching bag. Warren Harding, D tier. He wasn't terrible, but he is similar to Ulysses S. Grant in that he was way too trusting of his friends, which allowed for a lot of corruption to happen. And unfortunately, and unlike with Ulysses S. Grant, he doesn't have another part of his legacy to, you know, like lift him up in the eyes of historians later. So I think he's going to be Calvin Coolidge, S tier. Calvin Coolidge is an S tier president. Like, Calvin Coolidge is, I think, like the platonic ideal of like a Reaganite Republican. Like, in fact, Calvin Coolidge was Ronald Reagan's favorite president from his own lifetime. And like he's the one who brought like a Calvin Coolidge portrait into the Oval Office. A lot of his like economic policy was based around like Coolidge era policies. It was very interesting. Like, Coolidge was the last president, I think, to actually shrink the size of government. He actively cut down on military spending as well as domestic spending and taxes. The last president to actually be a fiscal conservative. Now, there were some unfortunate parts of his legacy. You know, the restrictions on immigration weren't so great. In his defense, like if you read like Amity Shlaes' biography of Coolidge, they'll tell you that he wasn't actually a huge fan of the restrictions on immigration. You know, he felt like that actually violated treaties, which is why Japan was angry at the United States over the immigration laws. But it was mostly just kind of a politics of the time kind of thing, and so he just kind of went along with it because it wasn't that controversial at the time. But I think he later regretted it, along with a lot of the protectionism. You know, like, and Coolidge was probably like the first Republican president to start sort of like questioning the utility of tariffs. So yeah, he's S tier. S tier as far as I'm concerned. Next, we have Herbert Hoover, who is a D tier president. He's not F tier, but like a lot of the stuff that I dislike about later presidents began with Hoover. You know, it's like I have a whole video about You've Been Lied To about Herbert Hoover, which dispels myths that a lot of people claim to dislike him, but might also make you aware of other reasons that you might want to dislike him. So like Mr. B did something similar with this, but like Herbert Hoover pre and post presidency is pretty great, but President Hoover is not great. So D tier. Next, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he is F tier. F tier right alongside his political mentor, Woodrow Wilson. And this isn't hyperbole. Wilson was his mentor. You know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt served in the Wilson administration. You read like what he and all the members like of the FDR administration talked about during the 1930s and 40s, and they were constantly citing Wilson as their inspiration for like every policy matter. You know, it's like he was their ideal. Wilson was FDR's favorite president, and that should be a problem. The New Deal policies were terrible and unconstitutional. He didn't need to run for a third and fourth term. You know, like nobody else running in 1940 was going to keep America out of the war. I made a whole video about that. So yeah, FDR, F tier. Harry Truman, B tier. You know, deciding to drop the bomb on Japan and saving millions of lives in the process, both you know, like American, British, and Japanese lives, I think was a very big decision. I'm not a huge fan of Wilson of Truman on terms of foreign policy. His support for the establishment of Israel, I think, was really good. I've got a book about that I need to read. His willingness to defend Korea when unfortunately his policies of ignoring Korea allowed the war to happen in the first place. So yeah, that's not great, but you know, I think the big decisions weigh a lot here, and dropping the bomb on Japan, I think, was a very important thing he did. So I think that makes him a B tier president. All right, next we have Eisenhower, and Eisenhower is a mixed bag. In terms of personality, I really want to place him at A tier, and he was definitely very valuable at the time he was there in the presidency, foreign policy. That's that's when the CIA had kind of its most unhinged moments, be it Iran, Guatemala. It's difficult. If I had a spot between A and B, that's probably where I'd place him, but I think I'm going to default to B tier. He's not a bad president by any means. Would probably be a step up from what we've had recently. John F. Kennedy, C tier. The only reason he's ranked as highly as he is by anybody today is because he was assassinated. So nothing really special on that front. C tier. I might even move him down to D tier. Next we have Lyndon Johnson. Hey, LBJ. Where on this list will I put you today? Part of me really wants to give him D tier because of Vietnam and the Great Society programs, but the civil rights bills were very big and very important at the time. They definitely did a lot towards making social progress in America, whereas some of those other policies negated some of that progress or caused regression in other areas. So it's a mixed bag because of how bad the bad things were mixed with how good the good thing was. I feel the need to place him at C tier. Next, we have Nixon. Nixon would fall as if I were making a top 10 list of most impactful presidents, Nixon might be on that list, especially for, opening up relations with China. Everything else, I think I have to place Nixon at D tier. He's not quite at F tier, tried to interpolate more malicious intent into Nixon's actions than he really did. Try to say, the drug war is entirely motivated by his racism. Well, actually, I think those people highly underestimate how much Nixon legitimately hated hippies. But still, regardless of the reasons, the drug war was largely a bad policy. And so I'm going to place him at D tier. Gerald Ford, you are going to be C tier. Gerald Ford was the right man at the right time. Never elected to the office of vice president or president. He steered the country through a very controversial time, ended Watergate. Unfortunately, that also means you weren't in office long enough to achieve anything, and most of what you did ended up was basically cleaning up your predecessor's mess. So C tier, I think, is the right place for Gerald Ford. Jimmy Carter, D tier. I've been reading a lot more about Jimmy Carter lately, especially reading even his own books, and good God, do I dislike the man more after reading what he wrote than I did beforehand. The man was far more arrogant than his public persona makes people think. He definitely had some kind of he had a bit of a messiah. He has a bit of a messiah complex, or at least he had a messiah complex. And so, and the bad results, foreign policy really screwed him over. And yes, he doesn't control all the stuff that went on, but there's plenty of policies he put in place that were not beneficial to the economy at the time. And basically, I might regret it later, but I think I'm going to bump him up to C tier. Most because two things: the Camp David Accords and appointing Paul Volcker to the Fed. Those were the two very big, very important decisions. Now, Paul Volcker was mostly his doing, but Camp David, I've been reading more and more about the Camp David Accords, and yeah, that was kind of an accident. His success with the Camp David Accords was largely an accident. Israel and Egypt were already negotiating with each other behind the scenes, and he guys kind of came in and made the process more public. I still think he deserves some credit for it, but not as much as he typically gets, so that is going to keep him at C tier for me. And now finally, last but not least, Ronald Reagan. Reagan is a more complicated figure than a lot of people want to suggest. The internet left's obsession with neoliberalism, I think makes, not only do they not understand economics, they don't actually understand the history and what was actually going on at the time. Reagan is a figure who's a lot like Abraham Lincoln in that there's the idea of him versus the reality of him. The idea of Lincoln is great, but the reality of Lincoln is less so. And it's similar with Reagan. The idea of Reagan, the platonic ideal of Reagan is Calvin Coolidge. That's the platonic ideal of Reagan. Unfortunately, Reagan did not live up to his platonic ideal, and so I think I would give Reagan B tier. He doesn't deserve blame for a lot of the stuff people blame him for, like shutting down mental institutions, but there are things he does, and maybe I'll make a video about that at some point. But yeah, so he is B tier. And so those are all the presidents who served before I was born. Every presidential tier list, I think, should exclude the current holder of the office. I just happen to think, I should also exclude everyone who served in my lifetime because I think I am less capable of being objective about them. That doesn't mean I don't have thoughts. And so I know at the beginning of the video I said these guys were not going to get rated. Well, I lied. They are going to be, but not here on YouTube. If you want to see the 6 most recent presidents get ranked in this list, then you're going to have to join the Casual Historian Patreon at patreon.com/casualhistorian. Members of the Patreon get access to a patrons-only Discord server, as well as getting access to videos early. And these early access videos will also contain sometimes additional information, and they won't include the ads or sponsors. So you can watch a more streamlined version of the video that occasionally has extra information, like you're getting in this video. So if that is of interest to you, then go to patreon.com/casualhistorian to find the right tier for you. Doing so helps Casual Historian make more videos, keeps the lights on here, and lets us tell more interesting stories. I would also like to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring this video again. If you are on your own health journey like I have been this year, then HelloFresh can be a great way to start it. It's delicious food, great recipes that you can reuse, and overall, it's a very good deal. It supports the channel by doing so, so go ahead and check it out in the top link in the description or in the pinned comment down below. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. If you enjoyed this video and like to see more like it, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. And give this video a like. That tells the algorithm that you want to see more of these videos in your home feed. And I would like to ask that, go ahead and watch the previous video I made about how FDR abolished the gold standard. YouTube really screwed that video over in the algorithm, and I would like more people to see it. I think it's good work. If you're not familiar with the history, I think it's a valuable insight into one of the many reasons why I think FDR deserves to be an F tier. So go ahead and check out that video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.